Right.
So, alright, so perfect. Great to have you joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Just to go a bit just to, if viewers didn't know who you are, just to go a few of your jobs from the past, just go through, and it is quite a long list to be honest as well. So you were formerly employed by Senator Clinton, or was it through the Washington Internship Programme?
Yep, that's right.
You were former speechwriter and press assistant in Brussels.
Yep.
Peace Commissioner for the city.
Way back when, yeah.
Elected for the City Council in 2014 and subsequently were elected for the Dáil in 2016.
That's right.
I think that's everything, is it?
That's everything for now, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So one of the first questions I really actually wanted to ask you, because I do ask all of my all of the guests I have on this, but I was actually really interested to get your view on this, was if somebody didn't know who Noel Rock was and you were to then describe your principles and your values, how would you put it across to people?
That's an interesting question. You often don't consider these things in such a sort of a helicopter view, kind of reflective way. I like to think of myself as a normal person, trying to do decent things, both in the area and at the national level as well. Someone who works with a strategic approach to things and doesn't simply say they're going to do something, but actually chases it up, pursues it, and tries to achieve it. So I'm someone who kind of, I suppose, follows through on what they say they're going to do, which I think in politics can be a kind of a rare quality nowadays, where people are happy to say things, but not necessarily happy to do the work to go and achieve them thereafter.
Okay. Was it always your view intentionally when you were growing up to go into politics, or was there, I know I had read a few articles in which you had mentioned you had talked about doing journalism as well.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that really caught your eye, or was it just mainly those two aspects of...
Yeah, mainly those two. Well, not even mainly those two, actually. I mean, journalism was kind of the singular kind of pursuit I thought I'd have. And that was definitely what I was going through school with that in mind, and going into college with that in mind. Like, in terms of alternatives, like, yeah, love to be a guard. I always think it's kind of a lot of the same kind of community-focused principles that makes, a good politician would make a good guard as well. And also, like I said, I love following through on work and kind of investigating things to their conclusion. So again, that serves a journalist well. Obviously, you can see how that skill set fits a journalist, fits a politician well, but also fit a guard well as well, I think. So there's probably a good Venn diagram crossover in terms of the skills required.
So was that mentality, say, like, well, at least let's look at all those jobs in perspective, they're always, a lot of people would consider them maybe helping people, trying to expose wrongdoings and whatnot. Would that have come from maybe a younger age, or was there anyone in particular who kind of inspired you that way?
I think it's just where my natural interests are kind of drawn to, I suppose. I love good mystery and I love solving things, and often when you're dealing with the civil service or various departments or various organisations, when we're scrutinising them in Oireachtas committees, that's what you're doing in politics. You're actually trying to get to the nub of a truth, and sometimes people are trying to give you their version of the truth, if you like, a spin as we call it nowadays, and trying to make that become the truth. But in reality, the truth is very complicated. If you look at any policy debate, if you look at any organisation that we're scrutinising in the Oireachtas, it takes good questions, good research, and good insight to delve a little bit deeper and get to the truth. And I think you see, like, some videos go viral reasonably regularly of this new American politician, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when she's scrutinizing people and trying to, make them reveal facts that they otherwise didn't want to reveal necessarily, and, air the truth. And I think that's an important skill, and it's one that, I very much enjoy about this job, is that I get to use that skill. But if I was a guard or a journalist, that'd be what I'd be trying to do as well.
So you grew up in the Ballymun area. One of the questions I'd have for you would be, when you were growing up, what sort of inspirations would you have had around you, coming from more of a domestic level, say in your own community, and then more on a broader level, so your inspirations from well-known figures at the time? They don't have to be politicians.
Around the area, there would have been a lot of good community workers and a lot of good teachers in particular, that would have served as a kind of a stable presence and a kind of a quiet, modest inspiration in that regard. People who worked hard, showed consistent interest in you and what you were doing, and pushed you on to do other things, and you're always grateful for that. In terms of national figures at the time, To be honest, they weren't really. Nobody really stands out to me, so there's no point in there's no point in manufacturing one. Politics was very remote from life in Ballymun when I was young. And it very much felt like Ballymun was a place forgotten by politics and politicians and every party. And I always thought that was, when I look at it now from this perspective in the job I do now, I always think that's a shame.
I suppose that begs the question then, just leading off from that point, if there was no real political parties or even political influence within your area, what made you decide to go with Fine Gael then?
Well, I did the Washington program in 2006, so I would have been 18, would have been just after my first year in DCU, and I was being approached by various parties at that stage, being asked to join, and I thought, well, we need to be a bit structured about this. No point in saying yes to the first party that asks you, as flattering as that is and all that. So I sat down, got the various manifestos, because it was coming up to a general election year, handily enough, so they all had manifestos. Got the various manifestos, printed them out, and then got the kind of Wikipedia kind of potted history of each party, printed them out as well, and had a read of them. And I just thought Fine Gael and their history of social liberalism under Garret Fitzgerald, and their history of kind of economic good management, I suppose. Strong anti-corruption stance. Remember, the Mahon tribunals would have been taking place around this time as well, so Fianna Fáil were under a very, very dark cloud of perceived corruption. All those things appealed to me, and Fine Gael came out on top. I always say in my kind of my list, the Green Party came a very strong second. So it's interesting now to see in the current climate, as we sit here in 2019, the Green Party having its biggest moment, I suppose, popularity that they've ever had, which I think is a good thing.
So you did talk about, printing out various bits of information on different parties and looking through them. So I suppose that kind of does come from your idea of wanting to investigate everything and go through all of it, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it does, yeah.
You, as I mentioned before, you grew up in the Ballymun area. You went to Our Ladies of Victories, St. Aidan CBS. Then you subsequently went to DCU and became a councillor and TD for both the area.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's always been a good thing for you to have been in the one area your entire life and to figure out, how I'm going to fix this one particular area, this small part of Dublin, or would you prefer maybe to have branched out a little bit while you were younger to maybe go to different areas of the country?
It's a double-edged sword, right? So I mean, I did do a good bit of travel when I worked in Washington. I worked in Brussels, so I wasn't confined to one area my whole life, and being in one area provides opportunities. You know the lay of the land better than anybody. I did primary school here, secondary school here, third level here, represented us on the council, now I represent us nationally in the Dáil. That provides opportunities in the sense that I feel like I know the area very well, better than most. But equally, it kind of provides challenges as well, as you say, maybe a lack of perspective, lack of living somewhere else in the country and being able to see, they handle municipal issues this way in Tipperary, or they handle footpath repairs this way in Offaly, or different things, different perspectives. That's always a good thing. So it's a double-edged sword. Being confined to one area, anytime I've lived in Ireland, provides me with perspective in one respect, but a lack of perspective, I suppose, in another respect.
Can you think of any situations in just off the top of your head that maybe would have come into that category?
What do you mean?
Like, you talked about the lack of perspective. Maybe would there been maybe even a bill or something that you maybe wouldn't have thought about some way, but when you talked to the people, then you kind of had your views radically changed?
Well, look, anything to do with I don't have a great understanding of agricultural matters, so I always have to defer to colleagues, because there are no farms in Dublin Northwest, so accordingly I don't truly understand agricultural issues in the way that my colleagues would. So on every bill in that regard, you're always trying to get their point of view and reconsider and reassess. When it comes to things like animal rights, for example, I'd be quite strongly in favour of strong protections for animal rights. I'd be very anti-fur farming, for example. I was glad to see us put a ban in place on using wild animals in circuses. But you'd have some people of a more rural disposition who would disagree with that. So recently we saw, when this is being recorded, this was in the recent past, Primetime did a documentary about greyhounds being used for racing and what have you. I think a lot of that industry looks pretty rotten to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly subsidised by the state. It doesn't really serve any great purpose, and a lot of these animals are treated terribly, frankly. So I'd be very negatively disposed to that whole industry.
Mm-hmm.
But some colleagues would be very much of a differing and opposite view,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fine. It's a marketplace of ideas, and we debate robustly, and the better argument wins. So that's one that's still open to argument, and we'll see where that goes. But I feel like I'm right.
So where do you think that that obviously you talked about that viewpoint of being very strongly maybe against these sort of ideas? Where would this sort of originated nearly? Would it have been when you were growing up? You would have had a lot of pets, or where would it have been? Mainly
in that case, yeah, we've always had pets of one description or another. We have 2 cats at the minute. Yeah, I just feel like for anyone who believes in decent human rights, you should also believe in decent animal rights as well. I think people are becoming more cognizant of that in kind of the modern age in which we live. That animals can feel pain. It's nice to look after them well. Abusing animals isn't on. It's not acceptable. And accordingly, we try and design our laws in that way. Fur farming, again, in my view, my personal view, delivers an awful lot of pain and suffering for very little gain. So it seems to me to be a somewhat inhumane, kind of outdated thing. And I think in 30 years' time, when we look back at it, people will go, "Yeah, that was disgraceful. Actually, how did people stand over that in 2019?" Similarly, with the use of wild animals in circuses, it's kind of needless in this day and age. There are plenty of ways to, be entertained otherwise, I think so.
Of course. Let's just talk a bit more about Ballymun, the area you grew up in. So, what was it like when you were growing up in that area?
It's quite different to what it is now. So the redevelopment of Ballymun hadn't happened at that stage. There were no, there were very few relatively modern houses. Flats dominated the landscape. High-rise buildings of 15 stories, 7 towers, and then kind of lower-rise flat complexes of 8 stories, in which I would have lived in one of those. It was, it was a product of the amount of attention that people paid to it at the time, and by that I mean basic resources and facilities just weren't there for people, and you got a sense of what it's like when a community is abandoned by the powers that be. So things like shop facilities, the lifts would break down frequently. There were a lot of single mothers kind of in the complex in which I lived, and it would mean when the lifts broke down, it wasn't that they were gone for a few hours, it's that they were gone for weeks at a time. And suddenly for any single mother, that obviously meant carrying a buggy and shopping up flight after flight of stairs. And often those stairwells would be dimly lit. By dimly lit I mean it'd be only daylight coming in through very narrow windows. There wouldn't be any artificial lighting for the most part, because it'd have been broken with antisocial behaviour in the stairwells. You'd have lots of antisocial behaviour in those stairwells as well. So there were some very positive aspects to it. Great community sense. You still see people nowadays, lamenting and ruining the fact that the flats are gone. But nevertheless, you need to have, I think, kind of not rose-tinted glasses about this as well. There were also great challenges in that landscape, and I remember those clearly.
Yeah. Just to quote from an Irish Independent article you did back in 2016, I think you were quoted saying that when you were 7 years old, you were going home from school and it was an unprovoked attack. Maybe you felt like a rock or something, and you had a scar on the side of your head.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about as well that on your way back from school as well, that there would also be dealers as well asking if you were interested in getting drugs. That shouldn't be normal things for a 7-year-old to have to go through.
No, and I think things have changed now to an extent. There are still flare-ups of issues from time to time, in terms of heavy scale antisocial behaviour, issues of crime, open knife fights on streets, firearms being produced every now and then. We had an issue with a pipe bomb last week, we had an issue with a petrol bomb last week. So there are still issues bubbling away there in Ballymun. They're not as widespread as they used to be, but they are still there. And what we've found on more than one occasion in the last year is that there's still a communication gap. If a shooting happens, in other parts of the city, you hear about the shooting, right? It's reported to the Gardaí, it's reported in the media. What often happens in Ballymun is that a shooting can happen. No, this doesn't often happen, pardon me. What has happened on more than one occasion in the last year is a shooting happens in Ballymun. The Gardaí don't hear about it,
Yeah.
and accordingly, nobody hears about it for weeks after. It's only by a chance conversation with someone who might have been brought into a guard station or something else that you hear that someone has been shot in Ballymun some weeks previously.
Yeah.
You know, that's the kind of still not quite in a perfectly normalised space when it comes to crime and antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, because I actually remember when I was reading this article, it was actually quite emotional to read some of the things you're talking about, because I would have grown up on the countryside and it would have been very, wouldn't have even considered that any sort of harm would have come to a child in the countryside, because everyone would have had a great sense of community and there would have been a lot of things. And you obviously talked about there was a good sense of community as well. But
And there was, yeah, and it's, it's funny in that sense. Like, I mean, again, to use the phrase again, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You know, they're great issues of deprivation and so on, but then also a really strong bedrock of community and civic pride there. So it's, for anyone looking at it from the outside in, I can appreciate that's an unusual dynamic.
I think it's also important as well to take into account as well that at that age as well, that those sort of things that surrounded you could have either made or broken you. And I think one of the questions I'd have then would be, how did you deal with those situations a lot of the time? Like, was there any sort of outlet or anything that you had? And then subsequently, how would you give advice to anyone in a similar circumstance now?
I think, like, the environment made a lot of people, and I think Ballymun has a lot of great role models. Like, you look at people like Glenn Hansard, you look at people like Philly McMahon. You know, Ballymun has a lot of people that you can say went on and did very good things in their various respective fields, be that music, arts, drama, theatre, business, all sorts of things. For me, definitely, like, school and the influence of teachers was definitely the positive defining thing there, and the outlet, if you like, to answer your question. And I'm still very friendly with everybody who would have taught me through the various years, from primary school, secondary school, and so on. And I'm always very grateful for the efforts they made, because, not necessarily the easiest place, or the easiest groups to teach. Like, one of the things I've noticed in this job, looking at it now, is the amount of people who are going to school, coming from homes where there are structural difficulties in their lives, going into school on an empty stomach. As a consequence of the empty stomach, their energy levels aren't particularly great. As a consequence of that, their behaviour isn't particularly great. That makes it challenging for everybody. It's obviously challenging for the individual who hasn't got breakfast. It's challenging for the classroom who have to, work around this, and it's challenging for the teacher who has a sense of what's going on and knows there are difficulties in this child's life, but has a very limited toolbox in terms of how they can help and how they can assist. And so that's why I'm a big advocate of things like breakfast clubs and so on in schools, and about getting hot meals in schools. We're trialling that program right now. I'm a big advocate of it, and I think it's something that very much would help for people who, like I say, have difficulties in their lives.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, and we'll move on a bit now, just as I mentioned before, you did the Washington internship program with then Senator Hillary Clinton. I think if I remember correctly, you were quoted saying that it was her that kind of nearly changed your course from life, from going from journalism towards politics. Was it solely Senator Clinton who kind of maybe made you think, what, I want to do politics, or was there a lot of other things before then and she was just the final one to kind of say, okay, I'm going to do this?
Yeah, well, like, it wasn't like her individually necessarily. It was more so the experience of the office and of working in politics, and of doing the kind of the bread and butter work that we do here every day now, which is kind of community focused stuff, receiving issues, collecting issues, trying to deliver on those issues, and trying to deliver a certain quality of accessible politics. Not necessarily the high level stuff of speeches and policies and what have you, but actually just the bread and butter work of looking after people as best you can, informing them on their rights when they're in a bit of trouble, giving them a hand. And that was the kind of work I enjoyed in the Clinton office, and it's why I kind of pivoted away from journalism and towards politics. Always certain issues that I'd be very interested in. And I always thought journalism was a great fulcrum to achieve that change, and it still is, obviously. More important than ever, some would say. But politics is obviously the direct arena in which you can affect those things. So I thought, we'll give it a go anyway.
Of course. I suppose the penultimate question then. So, being the youngest TD in the Dáil, I suppose you'd wear that with pride, wouldn't you?
Youngest government TD. Yeah, there's younger opposition TDs.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is next for you then? Obviously, there'll be an election coming up, probably either this time, coming on to the late end of this year or sometime next year. Obviously, I guess you're probably going to run for office again, I would assume. But even after that, what do you see yourself doing?
Be an awful waste of money on all the posters if I wasn't running for the next election, and that'll be a very challenging election, both for the government and for me personally. It's no secret that my seat is under great threat, and we'll continue to work and battle to try and retain that seat. I think people can now judge me on a record, and I think that record is one of achievement, punching above my weight, and cultivating a national profile that very few first-term TDs have. So we've been proud of the work that we've managed to do under very precarious circumstances where we thought the government might last 6 months, and it's managed to last nearly probably 4 years, I'd say, by the time of the election. I'm very proud of that work. I'm very proud of the work the team has done here, but there's always more to do, and so going into the second term, it'll be about building on the achievements of the first term and delivering some big infrastructural wins for the area. I'm thinking of the Lewis and Finglas, I'm thinking of the Metro in particular, and these kind of wins will allow us to unlock the potential of a lot of the constituency, allow us to unlock the potential of Ballymun in particular. We've talked through this interview about Ballymun, the challenges it faces and the opportunities it has. No greater opportunity than good infrastructure like the Metro, which will finally allow Ballymun to realise, I think, its massive potential as being this great kind of cross-axis between the airport, the M50, the M1, and now the Metro. Truly, I think we can actually build a Ballymun fit for the future, and that'll be my role in the second term, hopefully at a more elevated level. Obviously, I would like to be some form of minister in a future government, and that's something that I'll be pursuing. But regardless of what position I hold, as long as I'm in the next Dáil, I'll be pursuing those infrastructural wins for the area.
Okay, so just my final question, actually my favourite question as well to all the guests I have on. After I'm gone and you're gone, I always say that because I always feel people are going to get a bit worried when I'm like, when you're gone, as if they're going anywhere anytime soon. But after both of us are gone and a long 100 years down the line or so, how would you like people to remember you?
That's a good question. I'd like people to think I tried my best. Not everything I do is going to be right. Not everything's going to be perfect. Not every judgment I make will be correct. That's inevitable, and that's true for everybody. But I'd like people to think I always approach things in a reasonable way. I was always open to having my mind changed, and I always tried to make the right judgment at the right time. And I think that's probably the best epitaph for any politician, realistically. What would you like them to say about you?
Oh God, put me on the spot now. I suppose I'll come to that question in a couple of more episodes time when I'm only 19 yet. I'm not considering anything like that yet, but I appreciate the comeback though. At the same time,
not a problem.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Noel Rock.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much. Perfect, we're all done.